Kate Adami had rehearsed the moment 1,000 times on theft flight from Lagos to Seoul. She imagined stepping out of Incheon International Airport into the cold October air and seeing Dayo's face, the same face that had promised her 3 years ago that distance would never change what they had. She imagined his arms around her, the smell of his cologne, the way he used to whisper her name like it was something fragile. 23 years old, with deep brown skin that seemed to hold its own warmth even in a foreign winter, Kate had crossed an ocean and a continent for Thisrunian. She had quit a job. She had told her mother she was moving to be with the man she loved. She had believed, with that kind of certainty only the young and the hopeful can afford, that Dayo would be waiting for her. He was not waiting for her. She stood at the arrival's gate for 40 minutes, her phone buzzing uselessly against her palm, 3 missed calls turning in voicemail into silence. The crowd around her thinned. Families reunited and drifted off in taxis. Businessmen in dark coats strode past her with the particular indifference of people who had somewhere to be. Kate checked her phone again. No new messages. Just the last text Dayo had sent her 2 days ago. "Can't wait to see you, baby. I'll be there." By the time she accepted that no one was coming, the airport had emptied into that strange, hollow quiet that only exists in large buildings at night. Her suitcase felt heavier than it had in Lagos. Her Korean was limited to phrases she'd memorized from a language heap. Hello. Thank you. Where is the bathroom? None of which were useful for the particular crisis of being abandoned 11,000 kilometers from home. She tried calling Dayo one more time. The call went straight to voicemail. Then she tried a name she hadn't spoken in months, a mutual friend, Ngozi, who picked up on the second ring and delivered the truth with the reluctant gentleness of someone who has known something for a while and hated being the one to say it out loud. Dayo had never left Lagos. He'd taken a job in Dubai instead, weeks ago, and he'd been avoiding the conversation with Kate because Ngozi's voice cracked slightly here, because there was someone else. Someone he'd been seeing since before Cadiver booked her flight. Kate didn't cry in the airport. She would tell herself later that this was a small victory, a private one, the only thing she could control in a night that had stripped away everything else. She sat down on a bench near the taxi stand, pulled her coat tighter, and allowed herself exactly 2 minutes of staring blankly at nothing before she stood back up and told herself she would figure this out, because Sesh always figured things out. The problem was money. She had budgeted carefully for this trip, enough for the flight, a little cushion for the first few weeks until she found work, and Dayo's apartment as her home base. Without Dayo, she had a hotel reservation she could no longer afford for more than 2 nights, a returning flight she couldn't change without a fee she also couldn't afford, and a taxi fare into Seoul that would eat a frightening percentage of the cash in her wallet. She was doing the math in her head, trying to decide between abuse and a very long walk to a train station, when a black car pulled up at her curb in front of her. Not a taxi. Something sleeker, quieter, that kind of car that didn't need to advertise what it cost. The rear window rolled down, and a man leaned forward slightly to look at her. He looked, Kate would think later, like someone who had never seen his life had a genuinely bad day, and yet there was something in High's eyes that suggested otherwise, a kind of watchfulness that didn't match the ease of his posture. He was 25 maybe, with the kind of face that photographed well in low light. Sharp jaw, dark hair swept back like he hadn't tried very hard and somehow that had worked in his favor. He wore a coat that fit him with the precision of something tailored rather than bought off a rack. "Been sitting there for 20 minutes, he said, in English that carried only the faintest trace of an accent. "No taxi, no one waiting for you." "Are you lost or did someone leave you?" Kate's first instinct was suspicion. A woman alone in a foreign country learns to be suspicious quickly, and she'd learned it earlier than most, growing up in Lagos where a girl walking home after dark knew to keep her keys between her fingers. "I'm fine," she said, "thank you." "You're not fine," the man said without unkindness. "You've checked your phone 11 times, you counted the cash in your wallet twice, and you're still wearing a spring jacket in October." He paused. "I'm not going to hurt you. I have a driver. I have somewhere to be. I saw you and I thought someone should ask if you needed help before you froze on that bench." Something about his bluntness disarmed her more than charm would have. She found herself explaining not everything, not the humiliating details of Dayo and the other woman, but enough, stranded. No ride. New to the city. "Chong," he said, extending a hand through the open window. "Where were you going?" She told him the address of the apartment Dayo had described to her in dozens of phone calls, the one she now understood she'd never set foot in. Chang's brow lifted slightly, some private calculation passing behind his eyes, but he said nothing about it. Instead, he opened the door. "Get in," he said. "I'll have you taken somewhere safe tonight, not that address. You don't want to go there anymore, trust me." Kate hesitated, every instinct her mother had ever drilled into hair-rising up at once. Don't get into cars with strange men. Don't trust Incheon in a country where you don't know the rules. You can sit in the front with the driver if it makes you more comfortable, Chang offered, reading her hesitation with unsettling accuracy. "I'll sit in the back. I have calls to make anyway." It was such a small, practical accommodation that it tipped something in her favor. She got in. The drive into Seoul unfolded like something out of a film Kate hadn't seen, yet but somehow already knew the genre of. The Sityun rolled in ribbons of neon and glass, towers stacked against a black sky, bridges strung with lights that trembled on the surface off the Han River. She had seen pictures, of course, but pictures hadn't prepared her for the scale of it, the sense that she had landed inside something vast and indifferent to her small personal catastrophe. Chang made 2 phone calls during the drive, both in rapid Korean, both too quiet and too fast for Kate to catch more than fragments. She noticed, though, that the driver's shoulders stiffened slightly during the second call, and that Chang's easy tone from the airport ad dropped into something colder, more clipped. When he hung up, he sat in silence for a long moment before seeming to remember she was there. "Sorry," he said. "Business." "What business?" Kate asked. More out of politeness than real curiosity. "Logistics," Chang said, and something in the small smile that followed suggested this was a joke only he understood. "I move things, people mostly, from one place to another." "Like a travel agent?" Something like that. He didn't offer more, and Kate didn't push. She was too tired, tore off from the night's humiliation, to interrogate a stranger's evasiveness. Instead, she watched the city slide past the window and tried not to think about Dayo, about the apartment she would never see, about the version of her life she had packed into a suitcase and carried across the world for nothing. They stopped eventually, outside a boutique hotel in a quiet neighborhood that Chang assured her was safe, clean, and Wench started to protest that she couldn't afford anywhere else already paid for. 2 nights, he said. Consider it Seoul's apology for how your evening went. He handed her a card, plain black, with only a phone number embossed in silver. No name, no company logo. If you need anything, or if that hotel gives you any trouble. Kate turned the card over twice, looking for something, a title, a business name, anything that would tell her who exactly she'd just accepted a favor from. There was nothing. "You're not going to tell me what you actually do, are you?" "I told you. Logistics." Chang's smile deepened slightly, and for the first time she caught something almost boyish beneath the polish, a flicker of a person who might, under different circumstances, have been easy to like without complications. "Get some sleep, Kate." Seoul looks different in the morning. Better, usually. He left before she could ask how he'd known her name. She was fairly certain she hadn't told him. She didn't sleep well that first night, despite the hotel's soft sheets and the exhaustion pressing down on her. She lay awake replaying the day. The empty arrivals gate, Ngozi's careful voice on the phone, the black car pulling up like something summoned rather than coincidental. She thought about Chang's hands on the phone, the tension in the driver's shoulders during that second call, the strange authority in a 25-year-old man who moved through the world as if every door had already been opened for him in advance. In the morning, she went looking for the address Dayo had given her, some last stubborn need to see the apartment with her own eyes, to confirm the wound before she let it close. She found the building easily enough, modern, glass-fronted, doorman in a crisp uniform who eyed her with polite confusion when she asked for Dayo by name. "No one by that name lives here," the doorman said in careful English. "This building," he hesitated, glancing behind him as though the words themselves might get him in trouble. "This building belongs to Han Sky Air, corporate housing, executive-assembly." Kate blinked. "Han Sky Air, the airline?" "Yes, miss, very private building." "You have appointment?" She didn't have an appointment. She had a stranger's black card in her coat pocket and a growing, uneasy suspicion that the night before had not been the coincidence it appeared to be. She thanked the doorman and walked 2 blocks before she stopped, pulled out plain black card and turned it over one more time as if the silver number might rearrange itself into an answer. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then some instinct, the same one Thath had gotten her onto a plane alone to chase a man who'd never intended to meet her, made her pick up. "Did you find the apartment?" Chang's voice, unmistakable, faintly amused, on the other end of the line. Kate's mouth went dry. "How did you know I was looking for it?" A pause. Behind him, she could hear the low hum of an office, phones ringing, voices speaking quick, clipped Korean. "Kate," Hess said, and there was something different in his voice now, something that had shed the easy charm of the airport and settled into aqueator gravity. "There's something I should have told you last night, about the airline, about the man you flew here for." Outside, a black car identical to the one from the night before pulled slowly to the curb behind her. And Kate felt, for the first time since landing in Seoul, that she had walked into something far larger than a broken heart. Kate stood frozen on the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear, watching the black car idle behind her like a held breath. "Chang," she said. "Who are you actually?" "Get in the car," he said. "I'll explain everything, not over the phone." Every rational part of her said no. A stranger's card in her pocket, a stranger's driver waiting at the curb, a stranger's voice telling her Tajit in a car in a city where she knew no one and understood nothing. But rational had gotten her nowhere the night before, and some new, harder instinct forged in the last 12 hours by heartbreak and jet lag, and the slow-dawning suspicion that Dayo's disappearance was not a simple betrayal, but something stranger, told her that the answers she needed were sitting in the back of that car, not on the sidewalk. She got in. The driver took them not to the glass tower with the corporate housing, but to a building on the edge of the financial district, taloned unmarked except for a small brass plaque beside the entrance that read Sky Air, headquarters. Kate felt something drop in her stomach as they passed through a private elevator that required a key card and rose in silence to the top floor. Chang's office was the kind of room that told you everything about a person without a single word. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River, a wall of framed photographs, the same man, younger in each one, standing beside airplanes with ribbons cut, handshakes with officials, a boy of maybe 16 shaking hands with someone who shared his exact jawline. A desk with nothing on it but a single closed laptop and a small carved wooden elephant that looked distinctly, unmistakably West African. "You own the airline," Kate said. It wasn't a question. "My father built it," Chang said. "I run it now, officially since I was 23. He gestured for her to sit, and when she didn't, didn't push. "Unofficially, I run other things too, things my father built quietly alongside the planes, things that don't show up on the shareholder reports." "What kind of things?" Chang was quiet for a long moment, studying her the way she imagined he studied contracts before signing them, weighing what a piece of information would cost him against what withholding it might cost someone else. "There's a version of Seoul that tourists never see," he said finally. "Networks, debts, men who move money and people and things across borders in ways that don't require paperwork. My family has one hand in the legitimate side of that world and another hand in the side that isn't legitimate at all. I don't enjoy the second part. I inherited it the way you inherit a house with a leaking roof. You didn't choose the roof, but you still have to live under it." Kate felt the wooden elephant on his desk pull at her attention again, an oddly domestic detail in a room otherwise built for intimidation. "And Dayo," she said. "What does any of this have to do with Dayo?" Chang exhaled, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked genuinely reluctant to speak. "You're Dayo," he said. "Worked for Ammon named Tiong Bay. Bay runs cargo routes through 3 airports in Southeast Asia, including 2 of mine. 6 months ago, a shipment went missing under Dayo's watch, not drugs, nothing so dramatic, but something valuable enough that Bay doesn't forgive a loss easily." Dayo panicked. He ran. Dubai was supposed to be far enough away that Bay's people would lose interest. "That's not possible," Kate said, though even as she said it, pieces were rearranging themselves in her mind. Dayo's evasiveness in their last few calls, the way he'd stopped video chatting weeks before she left Lagos, always some excuse about bad signal or a new job that kept him too busy to talk. "Dayo works in shipping logistics, legitimate shipping. He told me." "He told you what he needed you to believe," Chang said, not unkindly. Kate, I looked into the address you gave me last night because something about the way you said it, the confidence, the certainty, didn't match a man who'd simply stood you up. I wanted to know if he'd lied to you about more than just meeting you at the airport. He had. That apartment belongs to my family's corporate housing because Dayo used to work in a subsidiary I oversee, cargo handling. He was good at his job, good enough that Bear recruited him for something bigger, and good enough at that too, until he wasn't. Room felt suddenly too warm, the glass windows too wide, the city outside too indifferent to what Kate was hearing. So he left me at the airport because the same night you landed, Bay's men were watching Thatterminal for him, Chong said quietly. We believe Dayo knew they'd be there. We believe he chose Dubai over you because Dubai was safer for him than being seen anywhere near Incheon. I don't think ever intended to let you find that apartment. I think, if you had gone there alone last night, the men waiting for him might have mistaken you for someone worth questioning. Kate sat down then, not because she'd decided to, but because her legs had made the decision without her. The elephant on the desk blurred at the edge of her vision. You're telling me I almost walked into a mafia ambush because my boyfriend stole something from a gangster. I'm telling you that you're safer today than you were last night, and safer tonight than you'll be if Bay's people realize you flew here believing you were meeting Dayo, Chong said. Which is why I'm asking you to stay somewhere I control, until we understand how much they know. Do you even care? The question came out sharper than Shane tended, months of exhaustion and heartbreak sharpening into something like anger. You don't know me. I'm not your responsibility. Something shifted in Chong's expression, not offense, but a kind-of careful honesty he seemed to be deciding whether to allow himself. Because my mother was Nigerian, he said. Lagos, actually. She met my father when he was a young pilot flying cargo routes through West Africa before the company grew into what it is now. She died when I was 12. I don't talk about it because in my world, softness is a door people use to hurt you. But I saw Yao sitting on that bench last night, alone, abandoned in a country that wasn't yours, and I thought about her. About how alone she must have felt the first time she came here before she understood how any of this worked. He paused. That's the honest answer. You can believe it or not. Kate didn't know what to do with the honesty, so she said nothing. And Chong, apparently satisfied that he'd said enough for one conversation, called for someone named Adiz. The woman who entered a moment later was striking in a way that made Kate immediately understand why Chong trusted her tall, dark-skinned, dressed in a sharp black suit that somehow managed to look both corporate and dangerous, with a scar along one eyebrow that suggested her position in Chong's world hadn't been earned behind a desk. Adiz handles security for people I care about. Chong said, her mother is Ibo, her father is from Busan. She'll be with you until we know more. Nice to meet you, Adiz said, in an accent that blended Lagos vowels with Korean cadence in a way Kate had never heard before and found, despite everything, strangely comforting. I hear you had quite the welcome to Seoul. You could say that, Kate said. Adiz's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, Bay is dangerous, but Chong is careful. You're in better hands than you think. Over the following 2 days, Kate learned to live inside a version of Seoul she had never imagined existing behind the glass towers and neon signs. A Seoul of private elevators and unmarked cars and rooms where conversations dropped to whispers the moment she entered. Adiz took her shopping for warmer clothes, using a company card without ceremony, and along the way answered Kate's questions with a bluntness that Kate came to appreciate. Yes, Chong's organization was involved in things the police would call criminal. No, he did not personally enjoy that side of the business. Yes, his father had expected him to inherit both halves of the empire without complaint, and yes, Chong had spent years trying to find a way to shrink the criminal half without triggering a war with men like Bay who depended on it. He's not a good man, Adiz said one evening, as they sat in the corner of a quiet restaurant Chong had insisted was safe. But he's trying to become one slower than most people would forgive. Watch him carefully. Decide for yourself. Kate watched. She noticed the way Chong's staff spoke of him with a mixture of fear and genuine loyalty. She noticed how he negotiated a dispute over the phone one evening, voice cold, terms absolute, and then, the moment he hung up, how he apologized to Kate for the interruption with a gentleness that seemed to belong to an entirely different person. She noticed they asked her questions about Lagos, about her mother, about the graphic design work she'd abandoned when she chased Dayo across the world, and that he listened to her answers the way people listen when they are genuinely trying to understand rather than waiting for their turn to speak. She told herself she was not falling for him. She told herself this while lying awake in the guest suite of his penthouse, listening to the hum of the city below, thinking about the particular gravity of his voice when he'd mentioned his mother. On the third night, everything unraveled. Kate had gone down to the building's private garden, a small, absurd luxury, a walled courtyard of manicured pine trees on the 20th floor, to get air and quiet, away from Adi's watchful presence for just a few minutes. She was halfway through a cigarette she didn't even want, a nervous habit she'd picked up and dropped a dozen times since her father's death, when she heard footsteps on the gravel path behind her. She turned, expecting Adi's or maybe Chong. It was neither. A man she didn't recognize stood at the garden's entrance, Korean, broad-shouldered, wearing a suit that fit him the way Chong's did, expensive, tailored, unmistakably part of the same world. But his eyes carried none of the careful warmth Chong sometimes let slip through his composure. They were flat, assessing, the eyes of someone doing arithmetic with her life. "The girl who flew in for Dayo," the man said, in accented but precise English. "My employer has been looking for you." Kate's cigarette fell from her fingers. "Who are you?" The man smiled, slow and without any warmth at all. "My name doesn't matter, but you should know Mr. Bay doesn't believe Yao came here by accident. And he doesn't believe Chong found you by accident either." He took one step closer, and Kate realized, with a acrid drop in her stomach, that the garden's single exit was no behind him. "He sent me to bring you somewhere quiet, so we can discuss what you actually know." Somewhere above them, a door opened, and Kate heard Adiza's voice call her name across the courtyard. But the man was already moving, fast, closing the distance between them before she could scream, one gloved hand reaching for her wrist as the city. Lights blurred behind him, and the last thing Kate registered clearly was the sound of Chong's voice, sharp and furious, shouting a name that wasn't hers from the rooftop door. The man never reached her. Chong crossed the courtyard faster than Kate would have believed a person in a tailored suit could move, and the collision that followed was brutal and quiet in a way that frightened her more than shouting would have, a controlled, practiced violence. That kind of fight that belonged to men who had done this before and expected to do it again. Adiz was there half a second later, and between the two of them, Bay's man was on the gravel with his arm twisted at an angle that made Kate look away, gasping out words in Korean that even she could tell were a plea. "Get her inside," Chong said to Adiz, not even breathing hard, his voice flat with a coldness Kate hadn't heard from him before. Adiz pulled Kate by the arm, guiding her firmly toward the door, but Kate looked back once and saw Chong crouch beside the man on the ground, saying something low and final in his ear before straightening and walking away, leaving two of his own men to deal with what remained. Upstairs, in the penthouse, Kate sat wrapped in a blanket she didn't remember Adiz putting around her shoulders, her hands still shaking around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. Chong arrived 20 minutes later, his shirt collar slightly askew, a small cute above one knuckle that he didn't seem to notice. "He's not going to hurt anyone else tonight," Chong said, sitting across from her. "But this changes things. Bay knows exactly where you are now. That garden wasn't supposed to be reachable. Someone on my staff gave up the access code, which means I have a problem inside my own house, not just outside it." Kate stared at him, adrenaline curdling into something colder. "This isn't a life I signed up for, Chong. I came here for a boyfriend hog-hosted me at an airport. I did not sign up for kidnapping attempts and gangsters," and her voice cracked, finally, 3 days of composure breaking apart at once. "I don't even understand what I'm supposed to know. That man said Bay wanted to know what in know. I don't know anything." Chong was quiet for a moment, and something in his stillness made Kate's stomach drop before he even spoke. "That's what I thought too," he said slowly. "Until an hour ago." He reached into his jacket and set something small on the table between them, a flash drive, plain, black, unremarkable, the kind that could be bought in any convenience store. "This was in your suitcase, Kate. Suninto the lining, behind the fabric backing near the wheels. My men found it while checking your luggage for tracking devices, standard precaution after tonight. It wasn't a tracking device. It's data, shipping manifests, banking routes, 3 years of records that B has apparently been trying to recover since the night the shipment went missing. Room tilted. That's not possible, Kate whispered. But even as I said it, memory was rearranging itself with sickening clarity. Dayo, 2 months before her flight, insisting on buying her a Newsewit case as a gift, laughing when she protested that her old one worked fine, telling her it would make traveling easier, that he wanted the trip to be perfect. She had thought it was romantic. She had packed her whole life into that gift without once suspecting what he might have hidden inside it. He used you, Chang said, and for the first time his voice carried something that wasn't quite pity, wasn't quite anger, but sat somewhere dangerous between the two. He couldn't risk carrying this through customs himself. Bay's people were watching every route out of Lagos he might take. But a woman flying to meet her friend, carrying a suitcase he'd bought her himself. No one would look twice. He was never planning to meet you at that airport, Kate. He was planning to let you carry his insurance policy halfway around the world, then quietly retrieve it from you once things settled down. Abandoning you at arrivals wasn't cruelty. It was calculation. He needed you exactly where you are right now. Untouched, unaware, and holding something Bay would kill Torcover. Kate pressed her palms against her eyes, willing the room to stop spinning. 3 years of loving a man who had, in the end, valued her only as a means of smuggling something more valuable than had ever been to him. So what happens now? Now, Chang said. We have something Bay wants badly enough. Tohave sent a man to grab you off a rooftop garden, which is dangerous. But it also means we have leverage we didn't have this morning. He turned the flash drive over once thoughtfully. I could return this to Bay. It would buy your safety and mine and end this quietly. But there's something on this drive that doesn't belong to Bay's shipping operation at all, Chang said, and for the first time since Kate had met him, she saw something that looked almost like fear cross his face. There's a file with my father's signature on it, date 11 years ago, the year before he died. Kate lowered her hands. Your father died 11 years ago, officially, Chang said. A car accident on the coastal highway outside Busan. No body was ever fully recovered. The car went into the water. And after 3 weeks of searching, the company held a funeral for a casket that I have always suspected was empty. He set the drive down as though it had grown suddenly heavier in his hand. I was 14. I inherited a company, a title, and half a criminal empire before I'd finished growing into my own shoes, and I never once questioned the story I was told, because questioning it meant admitting I might have to go looking for Aghost. He looked up at her, and the composure that had defined every moment since she'd met him seemed, for the first time, genuinely uncertain. This file suggests my father wasn't simplifying cargo the year he disappeared. It suggests he and Bay were partners, that whatever went missing from Dayo's shipment wasn't random cargo at all. It was something connected to my father's old accounts. Accounts that, according to this, are still active. Active, Kate repeated. I mean someone has been accessing them, Chang said. Recently, within the last 6 months. He met her eyes. Around the same time your Dayo lost the shipment that started all of this. The silence that followed stretched long enough that Kate could hear the wind moving against the windows 20 floors above the city, could hear her own pulse in her ears, could hear, faintly, Adi's footsteps packing somewhere down the hallway on watch. Every fact rearranged itself into a shape too large and too strange to hold. Dayo's betrayal was no longer simply a broken heart. It was a single loose thread in a much larger tapestry that reached back a decade, into the drowned wreck of a car on a coastal highway, into the question of whether the man Chang had spent 11 years believing dead might, in fact, still be alive and moving pieces on a board no one else could see. We need to know who accessed those accounts, Kate said quietly, surprising herself with the steadiness in her own voice. Something had shifted in her over the last 3 days, grief curdling slowly into resolve, the particular clarity that comes when a person realizes the worst thing that could happen to them has already happened, and there is nothing left to do but move forward. If it wasn't Bay, and it wasn't you, then someone else knows the truth about my father, Chang finished. And that person let Bay believe the shipment was simply cargo, when really it may have been the first sign that my father never died at all. Adiz appeared in the doorway then, her expression tighter than Kate had seen it in 3 days, phone still in her hand. Chang, she said, and something in her tone made both of them turn. You need to see this. She crossed the room and set the phone on the table, screen fastened up. A security camera still, grainy, time-stamped from 20 minutes earlier, taken from a camera Kate hadn't even known existed in the building's private garage. It showed a figure stepping out of a car near the loading entrance. A man in a dark coat, face turned mostly away from the lens, but not so far that Kate didn't recognize. With a cold shock that stole the breath from her lungs, the particular set of his shoulders, the familiar way he tucked his hands into his coat pockets. Dayo. Not in Dubai. Not fleeing across a continent to escape the consequences of his choices. Standing at that very moment, somewhere in the building beneath them, 20 floors below where Kate sat wrapped in a blanket that suddenly felt like not protection at all. "He's here," Kate whispered. "He's actually here." Chong was already on his feet, reaching for something at his belt that Kate didn't want to look at too closely, his voice dropping into the same cold register he'd used in the garden. "Adiz, seal the elevators. No one comes up without going through you first." Head turned to Kate, and for just a moment, the fear in his eyes wasn't for himself. "Stay behind me. Whatever he says, whatever he claims to want, do not believe a word of it until we know why he risked coming here at all." Somewhere below them, a door chimed, soft and ordinary, the elevator rising floor by floor toward the penthouse, and Katia realized, with her heart hammering against the blanket she still hadn't let go of, that the man she had crossed an ocean to love and the man who had abandoned her without a word were about to be standing in the same room for the very first time, and neither of them had any idea what Dayo intended to do once he arrived.